My name is Brad Feld. I'm a partner at a venture firm called Foundry Group, and other than having a magnificent first name like my colleague Brad Burnham, I've also been investing for the last 15 years in the application layer on the web. We've been involved in many, many companies going back to the mid-90s, including companies that we actually invested with one of Brad's partners in called GeoCities, which was acquired by Yahoo. More recently, we've been involved in a number of companies that are consumer-facing. We're investors, again, with Union Square in a company called Zynga that's become very successful. Historically, we've been involved in companies like Sling Media, which I'll talk about briefly, that was very involved in the crux of some of these issues, and many other consumer-facing type applications, as well as software sort of one layer down on the application stack. So we tend to also invest in a lot of companies that help enable all of those application providers and the applications on the web to do what they do. So connecting them together, being able to interoperate between them, providing them some fundamental software versus hardware infrastructure. We're also a venture capital fund. We invest, all three of us invest in companies and buy equity. We tend to own between 10 and 40, 50% of these companies. I would say on average our investments are $5 to $15 million, so sort of that order of magnitude. And the companies that we invest in tend to be very young when we make our first investment. They tend to be a couple of people and an idea. They tend to be something that it's very hard to necessarily know how it's going to grow and be successful. And in fact, the conversation around, what's your business model and can I see your 5-year projections are not conversations that we have with the entrepreneurs when we fund them, because they're completely nonsensical. By definition, they're going to be wrong. Yeah. And so we spend our time on the product, we spend our time on the technology, we spend our time on the people, and sort of the vision of what this could become. And before that, I was an entrepreneur, so I had started a couple of companies. The remarkable thing about what we've experienced over the last 15 years is until recently, we really didn't worry that much about the market power of the infrastructure provider of the network. And that was because of a number of different factors. It was the way that things were configured, the market power dynamics that Brad talked about. And frankly, in a lot of cases, the innovation happened very independently of that network layer, because the network layer innovation and advancement happened at whatever pace it happened. And some of the amazing software accomplishments which happened by these entrepreneurial companies were done the benefit from, maybe the best phrase is benign neglect of the investment that these infrastructure providers made in their networks, because it forced all of the software companies and application companies to actually drive real innovation to deal with what was essentially whatever network existed. Now the interesting thing was that because that network existed as an abstraction layer, the innovation vector of these software companies and sort of consumer-facing companies was much faster and was really driven by consumer needs. And so you had all of these individual users, of which we've got hundreds of millions now, not just in the US, but around the world, that are all using this sort of same abstract thing. And the idea that all of a sudden one of the infrastructure providers could start to have any sort of control over that vector of innovation is just fundamentally a bad idea. And it's a bad idea because what it'll do, Brad gives the example of how it shuts down innovation on the front end, it also creates a type of friction as innovation becomes more distributed. So if you look at companies, and Twitter's a great example, the brilliant success of Twitter has been a function of their open ecosystem and their ability for other services and other applications to interoperate with them. And what you start with is an innovation at the beginning, fundamental idea. To get to the adoption, what you don't need, again, is a gatekeeper or some third party that's saying you can do this or you can't do that on my network and you have to justify it. They have other mechanisms for deciding how they want to invest and what kind of infrastructure they want to provide. And I'd actually make the assertion that if some of the infrastructure providers decided to not invest, others would. And those others that would then cause the ones that weren't investing to invest, to continue to compete with the ones that did. So that dynamic really becomes independent of this sort of application layer. I'll give you Sling as an example of that, which we were investors in. Sling Media was a company that was bought a couple of years ago by EchoStar. And it was a very successful company that created something that was a new concept. And the concept they created was this idea of place shifting. And their premise was you should have access to the TV, whether you bought it, whatever mechanism you bought it from, but your TV on any device you have wherever you are. So if I bought TV in my house on a cable box or on a satellite box, I should be able to, with my laptop, when I'm sitting in my hotel room, have access to my TV. Now, I'm not letting anybody else have access to my TV. I'm having access to the TV that I've already bought. It's just a way of moving that TV signal over the internet to my device. Intellectually, if you step back from it, we exercised early on the concept of it. Are there any sort of issues with content around this? And there were no issues with content. It was totally clean because they didn't create a situation where you were essentially repurposing, reselling, redistributing, rebroadcasting the content. You were simply consuming it for your own use. It's literally as though you took your TV and made it portable and carried it around with you. In that context, the innovation they created from a technological perspective is incredibly powerful, and it's something that has broad implications long term in terms of how this media is consumed. When they went and sort of talked to people and started building this product from a consumer adoption perspective, if there was a situation where every consumer had to get permission from their network provider to be able to use this product, the product would have never been successful. The innovation would have never occurred, and the end consumers and the end users of this technology would have never benefited from it. They happen to be in a world where it actually enhanced the customer relationship with the infrastructure provider. If you were pick your infrastructure provider and you bought a Slingbox, it actually cemented your relationship with that provider because you could now get their content, on your laptop, and it made you be more willing to continue to consume their content. Interestingly, because of the lack of friction, that company became very successful very quickly based on the core innovation that they created. And I think we could, as individuals, give hundreds of examples like this where if there was friction in the system that was provided by the network provider, the infrastructure layer, that friction would really inhibit the overall innovation. And sort of end with the idea that I think for those of us that are early stage investors in technology, when we think about where the fundamental innovation is coming from and what's pulling that innovation, it's really completely consumer driven. So people are, with relatively small amounts of money, because of this ubiquitous internet that has no friction in it, able to create new services that stretch our imagination. And as the infrastructure continues to evolve, those applications become more and more creative, more and more innovative. And I think that feedback loop has been accelerating in a way that benefits society immensely. And I think that the concern that we start to introduce serious friction or blockages into the system is a potential huge hindrance to that vector of innovation.
Thank you, Brett.